Good afternoon, everyone. We're going to get started in just another minute. All right, we're going to get started. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sean Dugar, and I'm the Education Campaign Program Director for Rank the Vote NYC. And I am thrilled and delighted to be joined by three panelists today to discuss the impact of ranked choice voting on candidates and voters of color. Here in New York, we have completed 4 successful special elections using ranked choice voting, and we'll see it used in our primaries here in June. This is a huge step for the ranked choice voting movement for a few reasons. Not only will the number of Americans who get to rank candidates on election day quadruple once the election is held, but this is the first municipal election where a competitive field doesn't mean vote splitting amongst candidates. So in these races, whoever is qualified to run can run without worrying about waiting their turn or worrying that they'll split votes with candidates with similar backgrounds, positions, or views. This is particularly important when we talk about representation and who is included in our democracy. A new report released today by Fair Vote has encouraging news about how ranked choice voting can help more candidates of color get elected and how it helps more voters of color feel heard and represented in the process. As we know, good governance can only happen with good elections. And so we want to talk about how ranked choice voting can lead to better elections and better outcomes today. We'll have a discussion with the panelists and then open the conversation up for Q&A for about 15 minutes at the end of this session. We tend to receive a lot of questions in these webinars. So here are some important tips to make it more likely for panelists to answer your question. First, preference will be given to members of the press since we want to amplify ranked choice voting near and far. Second, questions should be related to the topics we're covering today, particularly equity and representation in politics and where that intersects with ranked choice voting. Lastly, if we aren't able to answer your questions today, feel free to reach out to the email address info@fairvote.org, where the staff is ready and totally capable of answering your questions and connecting about ranked choice voting. So with that, let's get started. Let's introduce the panelists. First, we have Myrna Melgar, who was elected to the San Francisco Board of Supervisors in District 7 this past November. Supervisor Melgar is an urban planner, economic development, and housing policy expert. She formerly worked as the executive director of the Jamestown Community Center, deputy director of the Mission Economic Development Agency, director of home ownership programs at the Mayor's Office of Housing under then Mayor, now Governor Newsom, and served as president of the City Planning Commission and vice president of the Building Inspection Commission. So let's give her a round of applause and welcome. Next, we have my friend and former colleague, Marvin Randolph. Marvin is the president of Onyx Communications and the Southern Elections Fund. He's been an electoral organizer for over 35 years, leading voting and organizing campaigns in over 31 states, at the Democratic Party, at the NAACP, at SEIU, at Project Vote, at the NAACP National Voter Fund, and Community Change. His company, Onyx, managed programs totaling over $3.5 million for clients in Georgia, Michigan, Wisconsin, Illinois, Colorado, California, and Texas during the 2020 election cycle. So let's welcome Marvin. And last but definitely not least is Deb Otis. Deb is the Senior Research Analyst at FairVote, where she recently co-authored a report on the ways that candidates of color and voters of color are impacted by ranked choice voting. Deb has conducted research on voter turnout, election recounts, and presidential primary elections. Before joining FairVote, Deb was a founding member of Voter Choice Massachusetts and a graduate of Boston University. Welcome, Deb. So we are going to jump right into some questions for you all. And in no particular order, I think I'm going to start with Marvin. And so Marvin, your first question is, why do you think ranked choice voting is so important for improving representation?
Well, first off, thank you, Sean. So excited to be a part of this discussion. Actually, I'll give you 4 reasons. I mean, the first reason is really simple and clear. It's what bears out in the report. Candidates of color actually benefit from a round by round counting process. The study shows that winning candidates of color, particularly those who are Black or Latino, grow their vote totals between the first and final ballot rounds at a higher rate than winning white candidates. So it actually benefits candidates of color just because of the way it's structured. The second reason is that voters of color tend to rank more candidates than white voters. And you kind of have to ask a little bit about why. And we know that candidates of color are very careful about their votes. They don't want to waste their votes. This gives them a chance to really express their concerns about who they care about without feeling like their votes are lost. The third reason is that candidates of color actually see the strongest gains in districts with a majority voters of color. And that includes districts where the largest single voting bloc is white voters. So that suggests that the candidates of color are effectively earning votes outside of their own racial and ethnic constituencies, which is something that is a really hard thing to do in elections, especially as expensive as they are and as sometimes tepid as the party and the movements are with running candidates of color in districts that don't necessarily look like the ones that they came up in. And then finally, and I'd say most importantly, is that candidates don't pay a penalty when they run against the candidates that are the same race. I mean, what's the biggest problem we always see in campaigns? Folks say, oh my gosh, they're going to be a bunch of Black people running, they're going to split the race up, and some white candidates are going to come up the middle. This actually provides an opportunity for people to run and for voters to vote without having their votes wasted, without having their vote diluted, and without having the playing field missing a really good and useful debate from candidates that should have a chance to participate. So it just works on all different fronts.
Thank you for that, Marvin. Next, Marina, we're going to go to you. First of all, congratulations on your recent election to the San Francisco Board of Supervisors.
Thank you.
What was it like competing in a race with 6 other candidates in a ranked choice voting election? Yes.
So, I am a political geek, as most folks who run for office in San Francisco. So I've been a member of the Democratic Party and, worked for our mayor, for a couple of members of the Board of Supervisors as an aide. Of course, doing it yourself is totally different. One thing I was going to add to all of the very astute points that Marvin, brought up, which I totally agree with, is that gender is also a thing, and I think that women are underrepresented, both women of color in particular, but, just on the whole. And in my race in particular, everything that he said played out here, and also gender played out. And what there was one other woman among the 6 candidates that you mentioned, and folks worried, and some folks actually were hoping that we would split that female vote. And in fact, what happened is that her votes transferred to me at twice the rate as they transferred to everyone else. And so, I think that in terms of my experience, I definitely experienced all the things that Marvin touched on. And also, I think that, I won and that feels good because I'm the first Latina to be elected to the Board of Supervisors in any district in San Francisco ever without having been appointed by the mayor first. And so that felt good for the Latino community. This district is not majority Latino. And so it was sort of a marker of like, okay, well, one of us can win even outside of the predominantly Latino neighborhoods. And I'm also the first woman to ever hold this seat in District 7 ever. And that also, feels good. And a lot of folks supported me because of that. They thought it was time.
Awesome. Thank you. Deb, you just co-authored a report on ways RCV impacts communities of color. What are some of the key findings from that report?
Thanks, John, and thanks for having me as part of this discussion. I recently co-authored this report along with my colleague, Nora Dell, and we really had a good time diving into the data around these RCV elections. This report builds on some previous research. Previous research already showed that women and candidates of color are doing better under RCV. We are seeing more women and people of color running for office and more winning elections. And so my colleague and I wanted to dig into why. What are the mechanisms by which these groups are building power and gaining more representation? And so the really cool finding from my perspective is that this involves both the candidates and the voters. Both perspectives come into this. As Marvin mentioned, the candidates are seeing benefits from this round by round counting process where we're seeing candidates of color picking up more votes during the round by round counting process. As we know, in ranked choice elections, winning candidates typically have some votes from first choices, and then some of their votes, some of their winning coalition is built from voters who ranked them second or third. And we're seeing candidates of color doing a very strong job of building support beyond one particular base, consolidating support to have a majority winning coalition to win elections in the final round. So this is the candidate perspective. And then we're also seeing voters of color, exactly as Marvin says, utilizing that ranked choice ballot and able to gain more representation here. So one of the nice things about doing ranked choice voting research from my perspective is that there's a lot of data out there. This report that we published includes data from all of the single winner RCV elections since 2004. So this is 400 elections and millions of votes. And so we really had a lot of data to dig into to draw these conclusions. And of course, the movement keeps growing. So we're looking forward to adding more cities and more states and more elections and hopefully doing follow-up research soon.
That is great. Well, I know at least coming from New York, we'll have about at least 40 races for you to examine after June. So we are excited to have that number increase and to really be able to dive even deeper in one of the most diverse cities in the country, in the world, really. So thank you for that. Next, Marvin, I am going to come back to you. We've seen some talking points from RCV opponents across the country, but especially here in New York City, that ranked choice voting might disenfranchise voters of color. What do you think is the source of those concerns, and how would you respond?
Well, first off, I can tell you what I think the source is, and also tell you that it's a little puzzling. As someone who, in the midterms, I managed $17 million worth of independent expenditures. The largest one was for Stacey Abrams in Georgia. It was a $7 million one. It was the largest at the C4 table. And I can tell you that it's actually antithetical what people are thinking to what the study shows and what this system actually does. The truth is, I think that people are just uncomfortable with something that's new that they don't fully understand. But if you sort of unpack it just a little bit and you look at the times when we have seen a candidate, even like a presidential candidate, that someone sort of waits to see if that candidate is viable. Even President Obama, people didn't take Obama seriously until he won Iowa. So you have to ask yourself, what if you had a ranked choice voting process there? People didn't take Biden's candidacy seriously until he won South Carolina. White voters needed to be convinced, just like black voters need to be convinced of Obama and Iowa. So this really levels the playing field. So I think the part of it is that people are uncomfortable with what they're not familiar with. Another part of it is that folks that are used to running campaigns are used to running campaigns a certain way. That doesn't mean that that way is about making the playing field more level for the people that are trying to win. And the facts are, and I'm just a guy that, I deal in facts every day because elections are about math, is that the math says that if you actually give people a way to let their vote be able to go into different directions so they can express their full concerns about an issue, more candidates have an opportunity to rise up. And all the data says that it benefits people of color candidates better than any other candidate. So it's actually the opposite. So I think that part of what people are reacting to is something that's unfamiliar. And I think part of sort of changing that mindset is that we have to educate people. We have to have conversations like this. We have to have more people that are coming on board, like Myrna, who has actually experienced what this is like in an election and having advocates in an echo chamber that we built. I think that's how we change the mindset. But, you can go through anything in politics, any change that we've had, people always feel a little uneasy in the beginning. Folks felt uneasy when we, changed who could vote or how they could vote, because they're like, oh my God, it's going to change things. And yes, that's the point. It will change things, but in this case, for the better. And it will open up the process for more diverse candidates. And it will also open up the opportunity for people of color to really say what they want to do with their vote. And also not just people of color, but women and diversity that has all different stripes, of what makes up a progressive movement.
Thank you, Marvin. One thing we found here in New York is we did exit polling in the 4 special elections that have already happened. And despite specifically Black leaders saying that their communities don't like ranked choice voting, that they don't understand ranked choice voting, we found that 67% of those who we polled after having cast their ballot said they preferred ranked choice voting to the old system. That's 67%. That's a pretty good number. That's definitely a winning number in any campaign. But still, leaders and those in that community refuse to accept the math and the statistics and the polling that we found or that we conducted. Yeah. So I think we need more Marvin Randolphs in the world saying, just look at the numbers.
Math.
Yes.
Subtracting or dividing.
Yes, definitely. Myrna, we're going to come back to you now. So we've seen examples of candidates campaigning together, asking voters to rank us first and second. What are the impacts of this kind of strategy, particularly amongst candidates of color and women?
Yeah, so I did not have that kind of strategy with any of the other candidates, and that was deliberate. But what I did do is that when I first hired a campaign manager, I took a training from Fair Vote, and we both together poured over the website and looked at all of the articles and materials. And for anyone thinking of running, I highly recommend you do that because Fair Vote is like a wealth of information for all of this stuff. And so what we decided to do is to have a more informal ranked choice strategy with everyone. And so the way that played out is that I used the Fair Vote tools very intentionally about repeating the messaging of the other candidates during debates that I agreed with, saying nice things about them when I noticed that they did something that I liked. All of those things really helped. But the other thing, particularly, so I did rank someone as my number 2, and that was Emily, the other woman who was a candidate, who was actually not ideologically aligned with me. We were viewed as like opposites in terms of the of our politics. But to me, having and I appreciated her area of work. She's been a leader in women's rights, and that was like a really good thing. And so we, even though she didn't rank me number 2, I ranked her. And so, we didn't do any campaigning together per se, but I did tell everyone, if you don't vote for, and a lot of voters, when I was going door to door with my mask on, told me, yes, I'll vote for her number 2, for you number 1, or, vice versa. And so the other thing that I think I noticed about the ranked choice, running as a ranked choice campaign, is that I tried to collaborate with the other candidates a lot in terms of like how we were talking about policy in a positive way. Tried to always find the things that we agreed on and highlight that rather than what we disagreed on. And some other candidates chose to do the opposite. And I think it cost them, in terms of the ranked choice, because people are like, oh no, that guy is so mean, And so, but I tell you, now that I'm a sitting supervisor, having run that way actually has helped me quite a bit, because I now have all of these alliances with people in my district who are not part of my natural coalition, but now have my ear, and vice versa, and they're like special constituencies that were not part of my base of support to begin with. But because I ran in that collaborative way, they all have my number, they all know how I think, and they come to me and I go to them. And I think that that's a good thing for governing.
Great. Marvin, I'm going to come back to you. Southern cities and states haven't widely adopted RCV yet. And so we don't have as many real world examples from that region. But what impacts do you think RCV could have in the South?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting you asked that. I want to answer that question. I also want to harken back a little bit to the question before, about people not being excited about this. I just want to remind folks that folks weren't excited about the Voting Rights Act. They weren't excited when women got the right to vote. They weren't excited when 18-year-olds got the right to vote, because what it did was it expanded the opportunity of people. So, people are always a little resistant when there's change that's opening things up. So I just want to start with that frame. But specifically in the South, again, I think that, as you said, there aren't as many examples, but one of the things that is true about campaigns is that they cost an enormous amount of money. We just saw the most expensive U.S. Senate race in history happen in Georgia, 2 of them at the same time. North Carolina is about to have a U.S. Senate race that's going to cost $300 million on both sides of the aisle. There's a Black woman named Sherry Beasley that's running, and she's going to have to raise a lot of money to win that race. And there are a lot of folks, I'm sure, that are going to be supporting her. But one of the things that is really expensive with time, people, and money, the only things you can budget in campaigns, is runoffs. And so what ranked choice voting actually does, and would help in the South where there are runoffs, is that you have the runoff happen earlier and quicker, and it would cost less than going to an actual runoff where you have to start all over, and you have to go back and reactivate a group of voters. So what do I mean by that? When Stacey Abrams ran in 2000, during the midterms, and there was a runoff for the Secretary of State, Black voters were fatigued and felt like they put it all on the field, and they didn't come back out for the runoff. And so we lost the opportunity to have a critical person in that position that might have made the presidential race different or the next race different. And so, again, I think in the South, there aren't as many examples, that's true. But I think that particularly for candidates in the South that are candidates of color that want to run, that this actually gives them an opportunity to run campaigns that could be less expensive. And they would be different, but I think less expensive. Again, I hope that addresses the meat of the question that you were posing there.
Definitely. And then lastly, Deb, this closing question is for you. What would you want to study next?
Oh, so many things that I want to study next. First up, Sean, you mentioned all of this promising data coming out of New York City. So these primary elections will be held in June. And as Sean said, there will be dozens of elections using ranked choice voting. And with New York now in our list of ranked choice cities, we are more than doubling the number of Americans who vote using ranked choice voting. And so we will be looking closely at those elections. We will be looking for things like, how did campaign finance interplay with ranked choice voting? Were some candidates raising more money, or were campaigns less expensive under ranked choice? We will be looking at, how did voters from different neighborhoods or different voting precincts interact with the ranked ballot? There will be lots of data there. And we'll be looking for interesting outcomes, like come from behind winners, where a candidate, just like in Myrna's race, where a candidate consolidates community support in order to build that majority coalition and win the election. So lots of New York research coming up that I'm excited about. We're also looking forward to more local wins for ranked choice voting. Already this year, in 2021, a couple of ballot questions have passed. Burlington, Vermont, and Austin, Texas. Voters have voted to adopt ranked choice voting, and we continue to expect more and more local wins as folks see the benefits that this election method can bring here and now.
Great, thank you. So with that, we're actually well ahead of schedule. So we're going to open it up to questions from the audience, and we have quite a few. The first question I'm going to ask, and Marvin, I'm going to ask you to answer this, but I'm also going to give Myrna the chance. Can you talk about the contrast, or talk about the effect of resources, specifically money, and minority candidates winning in RCV compared to the traditional election? Marvin, I think you hinted on this a little bit earlier.
Yeah. So, actually, as someone that spent a lot of time running campaigns, political organizing and policy, I stopped counting after 121. Just means I've seen a lot of those. I can tell you that running an election where ranked choice voting is an option, you can run a more efficient targeted campaign. And so, I believe that it increases the opportunity for candidates that have access to less resources, and it makes elections not have to soar so much in cost. I think it also levels the playing field a little bit, because it makes candidates that may have less resources able to be competitive, even though they may not be able to go up on TV, which everyone thinks is what wins campaigns, and it's not. Or they may not be able to build an army on the ground that can touch enough people to have a conversation, which is the best way to influence people. So, I actually think that it makes it better for those candidates. And just, for folks who don't do campaigns for a living, I can tell you that there are three things in campaigns you can budget: time, people, and money. And the most important resource, and the most finite one, it's not money, it's time, because you can't get it back. This lets candidates be able to spend their time more efficiently so that they can have a shot. Candidates who might not otherwise have a shot. And I'm sure that, maybe, Myrna or Deb may, have, real life experiences that they can point to that say that.
Myrna, do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, so, running for office in San Francisco is really expensive. I think that when we, were doing our filings for finance, I did notice that there were certain folks who donated to 2-3 candidates. And it was, partly on ideology, sort of the spectrum, people of color donated to people of color candidates, and they tended to be smaller donations. Women tended to donate to women, also more at higher rates. So I think it's interesting how it cut out. There's no question that for me, the having a ranked choice system helped me with fundraising because it spoke to my my viability. So I think that if it was just me against the guy who was a front runner, who was, a gay white man, but who had run before, who had amassed a huge war chest before December, I think that I would have had a very small chance, and people would not have donated to my campaign. They would have been like, oh, Mirna, you don't have a chance. But because it was a ranked choice election, and donors could donate to more than one candidate and also vote for more than one, it definitely helped me and made me viable.
Awesome. Deb, anything you want to add from your research?
No, I think these two covered it. Thanks.
Awesome. Then I will ask the next question of you, Deb, and it is, can you address the research that suggests that RCV depresses turnout of people of color?
Sure. I think Marvin addressed this as well in one of his previous answers. There are some concerns out there that ranked choice voting may harm communities of color, but we are not seeing that hold up in the real world. And I think there is one negative piece of research out there that suggests some turnout declines. But in our opinion, it is a limited research that does not draw on the full breadth of ranked choice data that is available. We know that a lot of factors go into determining whether an individual turns out to vote. One of the key factors is whether that voter truly connects with one of the candidates, if they have someone they are excited to go and vote for. And so ranked choice voting's ability to welcome more candidates into this, including diverse candidates, women candidates, candidates of color, this will help more voters connect with a candidate who they want to go out and vote for.
And Deb, I think that piece of research that the audience member mentioned was actually never published and never peer reviewed. It's just kind of a document that's out floating about. So our next question is, there's so many of them. What should candidates of color know about RCV that they may not have or wish they had? And Myrna, I think I'm going to hand this one over to you.
Yeah, thank you. I think that what I have told people repeatedly since I won in November is that you should craft your strategy to the, to the what you have and not what you don't have. And so if you are running in a ranked choice election, make sure that your strategy uses that rather than, having a methodology that doesn't address that. And so study up on it, get the training, figure out what the tools are. Again, I will make the plug for Fair Vote, that they have a bunch of tools and just like really practical strategies that you can use. So I would say to candidates, if you don't know what those are, if you don't know how that's different than the regular way, please study up on it and incorporate it into your strategy because it will make all the difference.
Great. So I'm going to answer the next question. And it is, in terms of Spanish-speaking people of color, where can I find or who has produced RCV educational materials in Spanish? I will say New York being such a diverse electorate, all of our education materials are available in 13 different languages. And so you can find them here on the website, rankthevotenyc.org. They're available there. And I'll add that the city actually is now, thanks to an influx of resources from the mayor, producing all of their materials in 19 different languages. So we are reaching as widely as possible and providing education for folks in language. Okay, Myrna, another question for you. How can we convince Governor Newsom, to support ranked choice voting?
I don't know the answer to that question, but I think it would be awesome. In California, it definitely has been at the forefront of adopting, progressive ways of doing things. And so I think it's coming.
Awesome. And so Marvin and Deb, Similar question, how can we speed up the adoption of RCV in other places across the country?
You know, I think part of it is having discussions like this. I mean, is educating people about what it actually is and putting forward candidates that have actually seen it work to their advantage. You know, I also think that we have to build an echo chamber of people that are taking these points and talking about them. And so, you know, having folks that are talking about this that are specialists in elections that are saying, gee, if I was running a campaign, I would love to be running a campaign where this was an option. Here's a candidate that I would have may have had a chance if we'd have had this. I think that's important. I also think that it's important to have, you know, legislators that are actually currently in office saying this is a good way to diversify the people that are standing at my side as I'm running. So I just think that we've got to do the work to educate folks. And new things are always hard when you start, but you know, again, think about how many new things we live with every day now that have been around for a while that may have been hard in the beginning, like the Voting Rights Act, that people are really glad are there right now. And then the final point I would make is that, you know, is that we have to realize that there are shifts that are happening in the electorate right now. You know, this new American majority, I don't see Rising America Elected. It is a Rising America Elected that has become a new American majority. But these shifts that are happening in the electorate have really made the case for progressives very powerful. You know, there are more of us than there are of them mathematically. Black folks, brown folks, Asian Pacific Islanders, white voters. If you add up those folks, progressive white voters, there are that we have a majority in more districts and more cities and towns than people understand. And when those four constituencies are united, we win. Ranked choice voting actually gives you a way to be able to cobble those four constituencies together better. And it opens up the field for people. And, you know, again, you know, opposition is doing everything that they can to depress and repress and suppress the vote down to outright cheating. We have to be ready to push the gas and expand opportunities for voting and expand opportunities for turnout and expand the electorate so that we can change our elections at one, open it up more.
Great. Deb, this next question is for you. Is there any data about RCV and Native Americans?
Our data on that front is limited so far, and we're hoping to do more in the future. We do have a number of Native American candidates in our data set who have run under ranked choice voting. Those are included in our report, but we do not yet have data on the way that Native voters are interacting with the ballot. So this is definitely an area for us to keep exploring in the future.
Great. Let's see. This is a question for any of you. As advocates for RCV, what can advocates and organizations do to reach out to communities of color, educate them, bring them on board into existing organizations and campaigns? And what are the do's and don'ts?
Well, I'll jump in and I'll just make one point that I think is really important to remember. It's a point that is true in campaigns and in life. Messengers matter. If you are talking to a community, if you're gonna go in my hood and talk to my folk, bring someone from my hood who know my folk, right? Knocking on the door of someone that you don't know saying there's a fight in the alley, you want them to help them is ridiculous. Knocking on their door with someone that looks like them that they still don't know is only slightly less ridiculous. So find messengers from those communities that can help you have that conversation to engage communities. I think that's the most important thing in doing that if you're going to diverse communities.
So I will just add something, Sean, because you know, San Francisco has had ranked choice voting for local elections for nearly 20 years now, so since 2002. And there's still a lot of folks who don't quite get it. And what that has led to is that we don't use it the way we should. I mean, I think that, you know, the thing about the strategy and using the tools proactively is just really valuable. And I don't think that a lot of like the Democratic clubs and the people who are in these, spaces where decisions are made for leadership development and stuff always incorporate those things. And as Marvin said, yes, have folks who are that have the credibility in the community be the messengers. But I also think it's really valuable for folks to adopt that strategy and make those alliances with other like-minded communities as well. That's really important. So in my particular race, aside white folks, the largest voting bloc is Chinese voters, and I'm, not Chinese, but I have had in the Latino Democratic Club that I have belonged to has had a relationship with some of the Chinese Democratic organizations for many years. And we have those relationships. I think that we could do better at being proactive in terms of the ranked choice strategies as communities so that we can find those areas of commonality and advance the agenda. And there's, like those two communities, there's many other communities that are trying to advance progressive agendas. And I think that we could do a better job in educating folks for how to use it.
Awesome. Marvin, I want to echo something you said or say it a little bit different. If you are worried about going into those communities and to do education, chances are you should not be the person doing the outreach and education into those communities.
That's a good litmus test.
Right. Yes. It is great that you are thinking about those communities and how to partner and how to build bridges. But you should probably build those bridges in another way before you come to them with an ask like supporting ranked choice voting, or find, again, trusted messengers in those communities that you can work with. So a strategic question: how important is it for voters of color to limit their choices to ranking only candidates of color if they want to ensure a win of their preferred candidate of color?
I could jump in on that one.
Go ahead.
I think a key thing to remember about ranked choice voting strategy is your best strategy is to throw strategy out the window and vote honestly. So voters can be reminded that your vote only counts for a later choice if your first choice gets eliminated. So ranking some candidate who's your second choice or your third choice, it's never going to harm your first choice unless your first choice really didn't have a chance to win. So I wouldn't encourage voters to truncate their rankings or to rank only candidates of a certain race or ethnicity. I would say rank all of the candidates that you like in the order you like them, rank honestly, and that's your best bet of getting a candidate that you're happy with.
And Sean, like one thing I would add to it, and this is just, speaking about Black voters in particular, Black voters miserly about their vote is the wrong way to say it. They're judicious about how they use their votes. They want to be very careful that their votes is not wasted because, so few opportunities, life's not fair, right? And so, but ranked choice voting gives Black voters the opportunity to actually express themselves, or any voters of color, to express themselves about a candidate they care about without having to worry that their vote is going to be wasted. And I think that's part of the message we have to get out there, is that you don't have to fear that you can vote for a candidate that you really believe in. You can. And you can still have some place for your vote to go if that candidate does not make the cut. And that's going to increase opportunities, and that's going to increase diversity, and that's going to make it, I think, just a better progressive movement and a better progressive world.
Here in New York, something we say when we're doing education is ranked choice voting allows you to vote with your heart over your head. No longer do you have to worry about choosing the lesser of evils. You can vote for the person who may not necessarily have the best chances of winning, but is there with you on your values and on issues. And you can continue to rank and ensure that your voice is heard in the process. Great, thank you all for that. two questions that I am going to group together. Are there talking points used with elected officials who feel that RCV will make it harder for them to get reelected? And how do you talk about ranked choice voting in more conservative circles? Anyone can take those.
Well, I can jump in about elected officials. There is some research that Fair Vote is working on currently about whether incumbents have a better chance under ranked choice voting. And what we're finding, this is preliminary research, so this is a teaser. It looks like ranked choice voting does not have a significant impact on whether an incumbent will get reelected when we compare ranked choice cities to non-ranked choice. And so we could reassure elected officials that this system is not what would cause you to lose your seat. If you connect with the voters and run a solid campaign, you can win under ranked choice voting, just like you could win under plurality voting.
Great.
So let me just take a stab at an answer for that, Sean, because I ran in the most conservative district in San Francisco. It's actually the second most conservative. It has the highest concentration of independent voters and the second highest concentration of Republican voters. And I'm a progressive Latina, and I managed to win, and I think that is because human beings are complicated. We vote on our politics, but we also vote on a whole host of other things. Whether we think that that person is trustworthy, whether we think that that person connects with us, that they have listening skills, whether they care about the future of our children, gender, there's, immigration, like there's a whole host of issues that human beings connect to. So I think for conservative voters, what I would say is that, ranked choice just opens up the opportunities that a voter has to choose their heart. As Deb said, what's in your heart. Some of it is in your head, some of it is your, politics, but some of it is like how you connect to the human that you are choosing to represent you. And in this district, which is a fairly conservative district, along San Francisco standards, it worked. There are still folks who after 20 years are still like, well, do we really need this ranked choice voting thing? But, not many. By now, folks understand it.
Great. So we are down to our last few questions. So Marvin, I'm going to throw this one back to you. How can RCV lower costs for candidates? And I know you talked about this a little bit earlier, but can you dive in a little deeper?
Sure. Part of it is that when you're running an election and you're going through the math of winning, in an election that's a plurality, you have to win more votes to actually be able to survive, to the runoff if there is a runoff, or to even just survive through the primary. What ranked choice voting does is it gives you a fair shot to be able to advance. That also means that you don't have to win as many votes to place, if you understand what I'm saying. So it does change the mathematics of campaigns. It does make it simpler for people to win. And it changes the game a little bit. I think that's what's exciting about it, is it opens things up.
Great. Myrna, in San Francisco, ranked choice voting got rid of primaries altogether. Do you want to talk about just what that experience of not having to think about running in a second election? Yeah.
Well, I mean, it was great because I can tell you when November came around, I was exhausted. I can't imagine having to go into a whole other race, also for my staff and then the fundraising that's involved. Just going back to the question that you had asked, Marvin, I don't know if it reduced our costs, but it also definitely increased the opportunities because several of the other candidates chose to rank me as their number 2 because, they were convinced that they would get my votes to them. But so there was a bunch of literature out there that I didn't pay for that, went to voters. And, some of the independent expenditure committees did that as well. So for candidates who are not totally flush with money, and I was not the top fundraiser in my, race, it definitely, the ranked choice, system meant that my name was seen by voters a whole bunch of times, and I didn't pay for it. And so that was really great.
I mean, we also know that money in politics tends to be a barrier for people of color and for women and for LGBT candidates. And so not having to raise money for a second election allows for a whole new subset of people to run, because they may not have had the high wealth network of some of their non-people of color or male counterparts. And so that really does open up the field, at least in my experience, for people who traditionally may have not had the infrastructure or the ability to run and win. Cool. So we have 3 last questions. Deb, I'm going to ask you the first one. Is there proof that RCV makes for more positive and civil campaigns?
Yes. I love a question when there's an easy answer. Yes, there is. There is academic research showing that voters perceive campaigns to be more positive after switching to RCV. I know also that there will be some upcoming research that does analysis on the tone used in campaign messaging to see if that tone improves as well. But so far, the research that has been done in this area shows that yes, RCV decreases negative campaigning. So this gives candidates an opportunity to connect with voters on the issues rather than getting into a mudslinging race.
Great. And we're seeing this in New York as well. New York is known for its nasty and divisive politics. And we are seeing people hosting events together. We're seeing people talking about issues together. I have yet to hear a mayoral candidate talk about their opponent. I've heard them talk about their colleagues. I've heard them talk about their fellow candidates. Just simple things like that really show a change in tone in campaigning under New York elections or under RCV. So it's exciting. It's actually exciting to me to hear that civil tone in New York politics. Myrna, we're going to ask you this question. What was it like campaigning under a pandemic? How did your tactics change? And what intersection did that have with your ranked choice voting strategy?
Yeah, thank you for asking. That was definitely something that threw me for a loop. And to be honest, had the pandemic started earlier, I probably would have dropped out. And so I'm a mother of 3 kids. This was like a difficult thing to do. I think that one of the things that I love about campaigning and also being in office is the interactions with people. I'm like a total extrovert. I love connecting with people, hearing their stories. So campaigning without the ability to connect, person to person was definitely like the worst of the campaign without having the best of the campaign. After a while, I specifically asked our health department to put out guidelines because it was also, a federal, election. And so that we would know, what we could do and not do, whether it was okay to do it with a mask. And so once they did that, everybody benefited. So we were all out, door to door with masks on. And that was good. But it was still, kind of weird. In terms of the ranked choice, I did have conversations with my fellow candidates about, what we would do and what we wouldn't do. We all kind of came to an agreement, just sort of that, there are things that, we wouldn't do. There was one guy who was just like, no, I'm going to do whatever I want. But the rest of us, kind of all collaborated. And that was really nice because it was a pandemic and it all kind of felt like, we were all sort of respecting the community together, and that we all kind of had an agreement that that would advantage all of us together. So that was nice as well. And I agree with Deb. I mean, the level of collaboration and the lessening of the smack talking, was actually pleasant. It was nice. It felt like, it was collaborative.
Thank you. Last question is actually for me. I didn't plan it that way. So the question is, could I give an update on how voter education is going in New York, what hurdles we faced, and what the process looks like? So I will start off with the biggest hurdle, which is just the size of New York. We started off with a goal of reaching every single voter. That means 4.5 million people. So Myrna, for an example, San Francisco is about half the size of Queens. That's just one of the 5 boroughs in New York. So a supervisorial district is about the same size as a city council district in New York. So just thinking about the sheer size and numbers of reaching out to voters was quite intimidating to us in the beginning. But we've been able to hit the ground. We've lined up a lot of great partners who've been able to amplify our message. Our concern has always been those who are the hardest to reach. And so, especially in a pandemic, that includes seniors, because all the senior centers have been shut down until as of last week. So how do you reach seniors? Meals on Wheels, we've been able to form a partnership with. So they're providing all of our materials to all of the people that they provide meals to. Same with another ton of other service organizations. If you provide a service in New York, you're probably getting or probably sending out RCV materials. You couldn't go to schools because schools are closed. And so reaching parents virtually, especially in New York where there's a large charter network, as parents are applying for schools, being able to reach parents there as they're considering the application process. And then just hitting the streets now that things are starting to open back up. We actually have a weekend of action coming up this week in New York City. We're going to be in 100 locations over the course of the weekend, talking to voters, handing out information in all 5 boroughs, so hitting every part of the city. And we're also doing a virtual component. So for those of you who may be here, I'm going to pitch you. Those of you who are here but may not be in New York, New York is the test. If it works here, it can work anywhere. If it doesn't work here, ranked choice voting isn't going anywhere for a while in the US. And so it really is an all hands on deck situation. We do have virtual phone banking and text banking set up. So you can go to our website, rankthevote.nyc.org, to sign up for a virtual phone banking or text banking shift. You can also join us for our weekend of action. Our goal is to hit 3 million voters via phone bank and text message over the course of the next month before early voting starts. So we really do need each and every one of you. So with that, we are at our time. I want to thank everyone. I want to thank our panelists. You all have been wonderful for joining us this afternoon. I want to remind everyone that this session has been recorded and will be uploaded to YouTube, to FairVote's YouTube channel. And FairVote will also send out a link to anyone who registers for this webinar. And so we hope you can join us for the next webinars in this spring webinar series. And so those events will be focused on recent wins in Utah, what to expect in New York, and local advocacy for ranked choice voting. With that, thank you everyone and have a great afternoon/evening.
Thank you. Good luck to you, Sean.
Thank you.